We are trying out another program tonight, StreamYard, over there in the corner. This is the first time I've ever tried this, so hopefully it all goes well and everything goes smoothly. Tonight is episode 15 of the Help Action video series here on the Erasmus Expeditions. And tonight we are going to be talking about living in the moment. And I am very excited to have a guest join me this evening who is a player in a couple of my campaigns on the channel. You may recognize him. Steve, how are you, son of a bitch?
I mean, I still have a pulse and it's still beating, so that's a step in the right direction, man. No, I'm doing pretty good.
Awesome.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So you want to plug anything? Introduce yourself a little bit? Tell people where they can find you?
Man, so not much to plug. So I do actually have the YouTube channel Threedy Six. There's not a ton going on to it because with the shift of Google Hangouts and everything, it's been a big cluster trying to figure out how to stream and get things saved. Now, that being said, hopefully there will be, now that we've got some options, maybe there will be something going on to there, if nothing more than a prolonged discussion between me and some buddies who are doing some world building for hopefully what may become a 5e supplement.
That's very exciting, man. That would be awesome. I've been working in the background with a couple of friends also. Speaking of in the background, I've been working with a couple of friends in the background here and there, trying to make a setting book for the other campaign that I run on my channel, a world that I've been building called Momentum. And it is no small task. I'll let you know. But so we have a few talking points. I've got about 5 talking points or so, and then a couple of questions. And one of the questions that I really like to start with, I think it kind of sets things off on the right foot, is when and how did you find gaming? How did you get into the hobby?
So you have my dad to thank for that. Steve Fillmore Sr., who's actually also part of AbTab, and
I have seen his name, and I've been meaning to ask you actually if it is.
So that's my father. He was a big D&D guy back like in the day when he was in the Air Force, and so we were living in either Mississippi or Florida at the time. We drove up to Virginia to see my mom's family, and there was this place called Campaign Headquarters my dad went to when he was in the Air Force, and it was closing. So we went over there, kind of nostalgia for him, and we picked up Gamma World and Boot Hill TSR products. And he introduced me to role playing. And it was kind of childish and stuff because I was like 10 years old. And I played with my dad running basically just for me. And then in a game where my mom ran it for my dad and I to play in. And my mom is twisted. So it was like playing Gamma World where there were like biker gangs who wore pink leather jackets and could shoot thorns out of their hands and would holler at people in this very strange sort of, I don't know, evocative Desi Arnaz sort of way. And like that was just like my mom, right? And so that's kind of what got me into it. And in doing so, I'd always seen my dad as a creative dude, right? Like, I mean, one of my biggest memories is I got this really cheap set of army men, like the little plastic green army men. But like this one Christmas, we got the ones that came out. They came with that plastic hill. I don't know if you remember that. Like it was like a hollow plastic hill, like it was like cheap plastic, but it was a hill that the army could play on. And these tanks, and like, I remember playing like with my dad, and it was this like insanely creative thing. So I'd always seen him as creative, but when we were playing role playing games and he was developing these stories and these characters and this world, it was very seldom do we ever play in a published anything. That's when I really like sort of fell in love with it. And then when we moved to Virginia, I was living in an apartment complex, and my downstairs neighbor was like, "Hey, I have all these D&D books that my dad had before he and my mom divorced." And we were like, "Oh, what's D&D?" And so we started playing that, and then my dad was like, "Well, you guys are kind of terrible at this. So why don't I run a game called Shadowrun for you?" And so that was it. Like every weekend, other kids are like out there running the streets, doing this, doing that. But all the hoodlums in my middle school and high school would come over to my house on the weekend, and we would start gaming like right after school on a Friday, and we would stop Sunday when people had to go home. And that entire time was sleep deprived Shadowrun. Um, and it was just the best thing in the world. So it has always been a bonding point for my father and I. When I'm not feeling well, when he's not feeling well, either one of us are up late. Like we're always calling the other one and saying, "Hey, I know you got work, but I got this idea for this character, or this idea for this world, this idea for this adventure. So here's some stuff mulled over in your head. Do what you do with it, and then give it back to me so that I can, move on with it." And so that was my introduction, and that's been my kind of my existence since. Even when I went to college, I was in theater, so I fell into another group of role players and just absolutely loved it. It's always been like my choice of what you do on a weekend.
It never ceases to amaze me when asking this question, because obviously everybody's story is different, and like the history with the game and everything, not only just in the time that they've been playing, but also the how and the why. But it never ceases to amaze me how different it is, how many possible different approaches that there are for people coming into this hobby, and it's fascinating to me, and I think it's a really sharp representation of what role playing games can be for different people,
Mm-hmm.
how varied the experience is in general.
One of the crazy things that really struck me, so when I got into online gaming, it was actually it was a while back, and it was through I don't know if you remember this existed. It was Vampire the Masquerade, the YouTube experiment. And
Sounds
so
familiar.
was that
It sounds familiar.
okay? So a gentleman named Anderwood, who was pretty big in the RPG community for a while, had started this thing and had gotten like Andrew Dawkins and Matt Reinhagen's blessing on doing this improv Vampire the Masquerade living world deal on YouTube. And I was friends with Andrew in real life. He actually ran a real life D&D campaign for us. And then I got into it, and that's when I met Andre Martinez and Jen Martinez and Sebastian Bassinet and Christian Johnson, a whole bunch of people who are like in AbTab and other groups, the RPG Brigade when it was a thing, stuff like that. And through them, I ended up meeting Alex Gillette and Rob Davis. And Rob Davis is kind of famous for being a bit of a grognard, and I don't mind saying that because he would say the same thing himself. But one of the things that he told me was, he goes, "I don't ever want to play a game where I'm just a schlub, because role playing is my escapism. I'm a schlub every day. I want to be that fantastic hero or even that fantastic villain, but I don't want to be a schlub." And that kind of struck me because I'm all for being the schlub. Like, you want to play a Cthulhu game where you're going to go mad, like I'm fine with that, right? It's because part of the fun for me is in the character, and sometimes having that human versus the impossible is amazing, rather than having the 700 hit point fighter who can headbutt a dragon to death. But I get both sides of it, right? But as you're saying, like it fits so many diverse backgrounds, and it means so much, or so many different things to so many different people. Like the hobby versus I've met people that role playing is a lifestyle for them, not just a hobby, right? Like their existence is based around it. And it doesn't make them strange or bad people or anything like that. It makes them interesting, and they have a different perspective on everything. And I love that about the hobby, just like you were saying.
Yeah, the fact that it is so varied. I mean, it's every bit as varied as the people that play it. Um, and I think, especially recently, there's been a massive explosion in the volume of people that are playing, and therefore now the diversity is thrown into sharp relief. Whereas there may have been all of these different kinds of people playing the game, a lot of them weren't out in front.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of knowledge of there being a huge variety of players of the game. There's the typical stereotype of, the fat
Mom's
nerdy,
basement.
yeah, mom's basement nerd. People that look like me, with unkempt facial hair and glasses and bald. And there's definitely some truth to this stereotype, or there was. That was the predominant face, if you want to say, of role playing for 20 or 30 years, at least in the public's perception. And it's really awesome to see that it's vastly changing now. And I think the game's popularity has benefited immensely because of that.
It's kind of that chicken or egg question, right? Because the taboo of being a nerd is pretty much gone right now. Um, and contrary to most people's popular belief, Matt Mercer did not invent Dungeons and Dragons. It's just a true fact. Um, but when you find that vehicle that takes it mainstream, and all of a sudden people don't have to hide in the library at the school to play, or sneak into people's basements and avoid sunlight in sports, um, then you do get that plethora of people playing, and it does nothing but make the hobby better. I know recently you had talked to another guest about inclusivity, especially for the disabled and gaming. And Jaren, I mean, how incredible is that, right? Like years ago, that wouldn't have been a thing, right? Like, and you watch like Critical Role, which I'm a horrible human being. I actually don't watch Critical Role or Geek and Sundry or any of that. If I'm gonna enjoy my role play, I'm gonna enjoy it with people like you, not watching Matt Mercer. Not that he's not very talented at what he does, but um, I think it's amazing that we have that. To the point, mistakenly, hopefully, where Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro were like, we're gonna take it into being a sport, and I'm like, if you esport role playing, I will rebel. We will throw d20s at your building until it collapses because this is ridiculous. But I love the growth of the hobby.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where there's going to be a lot of fat that you have to chew whenever it's become as bloated might not be the right word, but when it gets as large as it is, there's going to be a lot of garbage that comes out. Just like superhero movies are starting to get now. There's a bunch of trash that's coming out, but there's also some really premium cuts that you can find, and they're going to be a lot easier to find because everything is out there more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there are tons of YouTube channels that exist to do nothing but showcase people playing. And they're not the Critical Role and Geek and Sundry or all these other ones. They're individuals like yourself, myself, the people that we play with that have these that are every freaking good bit as good as the high budget produced stuff, and would be just as popular did they have the $1 million per episode budget or whatever the insane number is. But people are stumbling across this now because they go looking for Critical Role and such, and then they go, oh, what's this Cthulhu by Gaslight thing? I've never seen that. And they click on something that's 3 years old and are like, all right, that's awesome. And that particular example, like those guys are going to do more now. It hit like a lull where they weren't producing content because who was watching it, but then it sort of just trickled in, and now they're like, oh yeah, we can go back to doing this, which is great. Like, yes, please do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I can honestly say, without any bit of exaggeration whatsoever, that I have played in more systems and in more settings than I ever have before, just from finding playing online. What, going on 4 years ago now?
Yeah.
I mean, I have played before that maybe four different systems in my entire life, my entire gaming career, and now it's easily three times that.
And it's nutty the experiences you have because with online gaming, like I have met people that have changed my life through online gaming. And I have met people who are better actors than some of the professionals I worked with when I was working as an actor in DC. Like these guys are and ladies are amazing. And I think that's part of what makes it so beautiful, right? It's like that moment when you're flipping through YouTube or if you watch it on television and like, The Voice or America's Got Talent or whatever, and here comes this unexpected just amazing performance out of someone who's a steel worker or a ditch digger or whatever. And like that's the great thing, right? Like we come from such diverse backgrounds. Like none of our backgrounds are, oh, we're professional D&D players. Well, at least very few of us, I would assume. But yet you still get these amazing like moments and sessions and stories that just blow you away.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice because after college, I didn't get the chance to act anymore. I tried doing independent film locally for a little while, but it's a very, very difficult thing to get into because not everybody who's involved really wants to do the work that it requires to get it done.
Yes.
So you end up sitting around and spinning wheels a lot of the time, and it feels like wasted effort. So this way, I'm able to kind of scratch that acting itch, as well as storytelling and the other things that are involved in role playing games. But um, so our first talking point is, what does living in the moment mean specifically to you? What are some ways that you think that you can accomplish doing so?
Um, so it's very interesting. Living in the moment is a term they got when I was going through college and graduating with theater and stuff like that. Living in the moment is a term that gets thrown around a lot, right? Especially when you're working on, I don't know, like Chekhov or Ibsen or even like David Mamet and stuff, right? Like you're you're out there and you're saying the same words every single night, right? And so what happens when you fall into that lull of saying the same words every single night? And so I had a very good luck in going to George Mason for theater, and all my professors were working professionals. Like they weren't just teachers; they all were actors or directors, and some of them, you know, higher up than others. We had a master class where J.J. Abrams came out and was talking about framing a scene for us, and I got to work with other individuals that came in, but all of them always live in the moment. And you just hear that term, and you're like, well, what does that mean? And then I finally had a professor that broke it down for me. She said it means be informed. I went, what? She goes, let the scene, what's going on, inform you. Open your eyes. And so when you hear that, and when it's applied to theater, you realize that there's going to be things that are slightly off every single performance. They're going to be slightly different. You're going to feel something slightly different. And if you're breathing in that scene and the other actors are breathing in that scene, then those things can inform the scene. And so the one that stands out the most in my mind is we were doing a master class on Three Sisters, and I was playing the doctor, and he's holding this clock that is representative of the mother of the three daughters who are the three sisters in the play. And we only had one of these clocks for this master class. And for whatever reason, one of the actresses walked over and she grabbed my wrist, and together we just like launched this clock into the ground. This porcelain clock explodes. And the scene continues in a sort of heightened moment for a second before it dives down to the realization you just broke this heirloom of the woman that everybody in this scene loves. Like, you just destroyed her. And there was no scripting for that, right? And so all of the scene building that came on the heels of that was probably the most powerful scene building that happened through that entire masterclass and the performance that followed. And all they would do is they would out boss another clock. But you have to have those moments. So when you take that and you put it into role playing, it's feeling the beats, right? It's sharing the spotlight. That's a huge thing. It's listening to other players and characters and letting what they say, how they say it, have weight. It has to have impact. We don't have a ton of props when we're doing this. We don't have the ability to yell cut and then reframe a scene, but you will have those powerful moments where there is this true character carry through. And if it is that paladin who's talking about his, lifelong fight after his sister was stolen, or whatever the case is, if they're opening up this fresh wound to you, like, you have to give it the gravity that it deserves. You have to be willing to, it's a gift, right? You have to be willing to receive it. Lenny Raybuck, if you ever watched this, that's what came from you. uh Acting, even on the role playing level, is a gift, and when people are giving that to you, you have to be the person that can graciously accept it, treasure it for a moment, and then give it back. And that's what it comes down to. So living in that moment is being able to hear what they're saying, feel what they're saying, and then make an informed decision before handing it back, because it is that sort of team sport, right? One person can't run with the ball the entire time.
Yeah, those are some excellent points. Some of the things that I wanted to mention about this particular question as well. Um, it, it's very much about intently listening, like you said, to what other people are saying, and like you said, the way that they're saying it, what they're giving you to work on, and not overthinking it, just reacting to it, and allowing yourself to genuinely react. One of the things that they kind of taught us in theater is when you're in a scene and something happens that's out of your control, something falls backstage and makes a loud bang, you end up burping in the middle of your performance because you can't hold it back. Your character would burp. Your character would respond to a loud bang. Just do it in character. Just don't step out of the moment and do it as yourself. Just make sure that you're reacting to things as your character would react to them. And then the moment doesn't get lost. It gets built upon and becomes more genuine.
I think the other thing, for being in the moment, is it doesn't always have to be your moment that you're in, right? It can be someone else's moment. And that's one of the things I find so wonderful about the Beneath the Banner campaign, is the ability for the people in that game to start crafting these moments, and then other people to not even build onto them, right? Because when you build onto them, you run the risk of it becoming gaudy. You run the risk of the outside shell becoming more about what's being built onto it. But everyone in that game is so capable of building up the foundation and raising that moment to a higher point. And I think that's what it's about, right? Is not only giving the spotlight to someone else, but helping shine it towards them, letting what they say give you something that you can then impact them back with. And I think those are some of the best moments that you can have in role playing.
Absolutely. It's very much kind of like a volleyball kind of situation. You're setting someone else up for that perfect spike. Like, most of us have consumed so much media at this point that we understand when we're in a particular kind of scene and kind of where it's kind of headed, what makes sense for us as an audience member. We're like, oh, okay, I get it. This is what's happening. This is where we're kind of building towards. And like you said, doing what you can to elevate the person who's on that trajectory, making them get there faster, better, without taking anything away from their moment. One of the other things that I wanted to touch on about kind of the definition of living in the moment and how you can accomplish it is one of the things that I've always tried to make sure of is being present. So even whenever you're not speaking in a scene, you're still a part of the scene. You know, if you're the barbarian and you're at a social gathering or a social exchange of some kind and you're not supposed to talk, you know, you don't want to ruin this diplomatic exchange, describe the way that your character is being a part of the background. You know, yes, you're not saying anything, but that doesn't mean that you as a player have to be silent. You know, you can describe and explain how this is affecting your character, what's going through their head, the way that they're staying out of the conversation sometimes is a lot better than just not being a part of the scene.
It's also less jarring, right? So if you are that barbarian and you're there, and then all of a sudden, the evil knight draws his sword, like for you to then pop into the scene, react, and like, I charge him with my battle axe. Like, where did you come from? Because I don't remember you being here. Um, but there's movies, there's stories, there's times that I'm sure we can all think of that you go, wow, what was memorable is that out of place character, right? I remember the barbarian at the tea party because of that one moment. And here, if we're sitting here talking about being in the moment, if you're not in the moment, if you're not enjoying what other people are putting out, if you're not participating, then when that spotlight all of a sudden flicks to you, it's disjointed.
Yeah, that's very, very true. I think one of the ways I like to think of it is you kind of have to point your focus inward, not just within the scene, but within that particular moment. Like you said, you know, the barbarian in the tea ceremony. You know, that's the moment that when it's coming up in the game, be able to recognize that and focus on that. You know, you need to be able to home in on what's kind of unfolding, and then just allow yourself to be there as your character. Um, Even whenever you're not immediately involved, again, you even if you're not going to have immediate input, if you have to give your piece and then fall back a bit, that's fine. Just make sure that you're still paying attention like an audience member would. You know, if you're putting your focus and attention on the scene, then you're going to be ready for the moment when it is your time to step in.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay. One of the other talking points that I had is I did do an earlier episode on immersion, which is a term that seems to kind of go hand in hand with what we're discussing. So I think personally that immersion is a tool that can help you live within a moment, but immersion itself tends to encompass a broader application, if you will. Um, would you agree with this, or do you think that immersion is different than living in the moment somehow?
Um, wow. Uh, Immersion's it's a really interesting term, and I don't know if as the genre of role playing has expanded, if it hasn't become a bit of a two-edged sword. Um, because so I often have this conversation with real life gaming friends. A lot of them are horror fans, and they go, "Man, I'd really have to play a horror game." Okay, great. For the average person role playing out there, you'll have an easier time pretending that you are a 17-foot tall Goliath barbarian who's deathly racist against elves and only uses butter knives than you will pretending you're scared. And that's because there are certain maybe primal feelings that are a lot harder to fake immersion on. You can still be in the moment. You can still portray being on edge. It is very hard to portray being scared. It is very hard to portray being in love. It is very hard to uh, portray being desperately angry, not just oh they killed my father, but like that. We've all had that moment where you are so desperately angry at something that senses fail, and so those core things are so much harder to portray. But when people ask for immersion and you go, "Did you get it?" and they go, "Well, I never really felt scared," or "I never really felt the pangs of love," or you go, "Yeah, I get that. That's hard." But can you be immersed in the thrill of retaking a throne, of being on the battlefield? Can you be in the same way that you're on the edge of your seat when you're watching Lord of the Rings, or when you're reading Lord of the Rings, or Game of Thrones, or whatever happens to be your choice there? Those often drag you into immersion where you forget how long you've been sitting there watching. Time has passed in only the scope of what you're watching, and not in real life. And I think that's immersion at that point, right? When your mind has given over to the time frame, the timeline of what you're playing or what you're watching, I think you become immersed. I've seen players, and I'm guilty of it too, where you're talking and you start finding yourself tearing up because of something that is make believe, and that's immersion. Um, and I don't think you can be immersed without being in the moment. I think you can be in the moment without being immersed. Um, I guess if you were to sort of look at it from a philosophical point, if you go, immersion is the ultimate goal, and living in the moment is the path to obtaining that. I think that's an interesting way to look at it. I also am reminded of another thing that my professor Lenny told me. She said, when you're on stage, you never cry real tears, because tears and emotions like that are precious, and no matter what you're doing, no one deserves that from you unless those are owed to them. And so you have to get to the point in that performance, even in the role playing, that the scene or the players or the story or the characters have earned that from you. And that way there's a difference between your character being so sad that the player is driven to portraying that with real tears, versus the player being so sad that they are crying at a sad moment of the character. Because I role playing is fun, right? I don't ever want someone at my table crying because they've had a bad day. And their horse just was shot in the game, and now all of a sudden that was the moment. That's a okay, break, right? Let's let the player, have a moment. But if you're on that cusp, you're fighting back those tears because of the character, and the other players and the DM have earned that from you, and you're capable and willing to give it. That's immersion.
Yeah, I think that's an elegant way of putting these two things in relation to one another. Um, so it might be fair to say that living in the moment is a tool towards possibly achieving total immersion. And pure immersion, total immersion, would be maybe loss of self in the moment.
I think so. I think so. And I think that might be a scary moment where it ever happened for the first time for a player. I think that'd be a moment where you have to go, whoa, all right, wow. We've all discussed these reflective moments at the end of a session, right? And I think that's what allows us to separate what happened versus what is happening, is those reflective moments where you had those immersive moments, of feeling, and at the end of it, when you can dissect it and digest it and separate it, so that now it's part of a performance and not part of life. Like, you have to have that button on the end of it. And I'm a
Sure.
firm believer in the post game wrap up for in real life online, you need that moment to thank everybody for what they gave, to have that
Process.
moment to process it, to absorb it, and then be ready for it for the next time.
Yeah. And those moments that you're talking about, those moments of extreme raw emotion, like in a performance on stage, you are given the chance to prepare yourself for that. And it can take a lot of time. Doing that improvisationally is incredibly difficult to do because there needs to be a build up to hit that peak. Otherwise, it feels artificial and fake and it doesn't work. You'll never, like you said, you'll never feel as a performer that you're able to achieve that if there's not that build that leads to that. And that's difficult to do when everybody is kind of just making stuff up as they go. But if people are living in the moment and they understand where things are headed and they do what they're able to do to build you to that moment, then it becomes simply a matter of you allowing yourself to take that next step into feeling that emotion and maybe even feeling it for real just in the moment.
I would have to 100% agree with that. It is one of the reasons I am not overly fond of one shots. It has nothing to do with the lack of experience progression. It has less to do with the lack of my character progression and more to do with the fact that it's hard to jump in with a bunch of people that you don't routinely play with and have a roadmap that gets you to something meaningful and creative. You get lucky once in a while, but without that, it's a lot more difficult because your first 2, 3, 4 sessions of playing with people, if you're playing that weekly game, that's as much about feeling out the characters and the players as it is the actual game and kind of what's the tempo, what's the beat for this player and character, so that you can then ride that with them so that you arrive at the same destination. And without that, that's when you get that. That's when you have that breakdown and people go, "That's what my character would do." Well, then your character's a dick, all right? Like plain and simple. That's momentary rant. That is never an acceptable answer, by the way. That's what my character would do is never an acceptable answer. Um, because you're probably just being a selfish dick. And if what your character would do is, oh, my character would definitely rob from the other player character. Cool, yeah, your character wants to take the fun away from another player. That's as meta as you get, right? Like stuff like that, like it can be done in the moment after those 4, 5, 6 sessions of feeling each other out and sort of coming to an agreement of the relationship of the characters. And then the stealing of the rogue stealing from the paladin is done in the moment. It's meaningful. It has purpose. If you're doing it 7 sessions in and you're still riding that mask of it's what my character would do, bro, sit down, have a conversation with those other players in that DM, and let's get past that. Because why is that what your character would do? That's the interesting part, right? Not just that your character would do that. And if it's because, oh man, he was raised in an orphanage and beat by these priests of this religion, and so now he wants to steal back from them, that's awesome. Let's explore that. But you get very poor representation and no moment created just by stealing from that paladin and saying that's what my character would do. Sorry, soapbox off. Hate it. Dude,
No,
hate
man,
it.
I completely understand it. I am a firm believer of, at its core, this is a game. And when you sit down at a table, it is your job to ensure that everybody, including yourself, is doing what they can to make that game fun for everyone seated at the table. If there ever comes a point where you are faced with a character decision that is going to threaten everybody else having a good time at the table, and you don't err on the side of making it and keeping it fun for everyone else, then you have become a problem at the table.
And I think you can have those, but they have to be discussed. And whether it's a discussion ahead of time or you've played together long enough and you're willing to take this risk, and then there's going to be that, hey, maybe we're breaking for a snack here in a moment and we'll have a chance to discuss it before we come back to the table, or we're going to leave that as the cliffhanger and we'll discuss it in our button up. Because I've been on the giving and receiving end of that, right? Where you do something that is not anti-ethical, but so a real life game playing with real life buddies, and we're presented with the situation where this little girl, she's like 9 years old, is embodying the spirit of a returning evil god. My character finds out about it. He attempts to murder the little girl in front of this desperately child protecting, wood elf dancing, monster collecting uh, character, a a paladin monk modeled after a professional wrestler. Like all these, and it was so shocking to the players that we had to go, whoa, all right, what's going on? And it kind of came to this boiling point even amongst the players where it had to get past that, but that's what my character would do. There had to be this explanation. And one of the wonderful things about it being a game is you can step into the meta of it and say, to make it more processable for the players, Steve, the player, and Guider, the character, are aware of this fact that you guys are not aware of. That's what's impacting my choice. And you have to have those meta moments because you are all co-authoring the story. The writers have to be on the same page.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I love about role playing games that is different than just playing a normal game. In a normal game, there's that constant trying to edge everyone else out, trying to get to the top of the stack, trying to win the game, typically. But that's not the focus of a role playing game. It's not about your character always being the best, the smartest, the fastest, the strongest, the best speaking, whatever. It's about the story that you're telling and where your character fits into that story and where they don't fit into that story. Recognizing those and doing what you can to support that.
And it's interesting. So Carol's over here in chat, and she says that she had a rogue who did exactly that, right? That they stole from another PC, got caught, and nearly killed on the spot, and became a huge cool conflict the rest of that character's life. And that's exactly what happened in our game too, right? It definitely rifted the party, but it became this pivoting point where the really good mellow grave cleric is what I was at the time was willing to do this, and it painted the starkness, the danger that existed in this storyline. And so yeah, it the other the monster collecting wood elf dancing character was played by a good friend of mine, Blair, and it definitely like those two characters' relationship was estranged for that campaign went, I don't know, 19 months, something like that, 20 months. And I would say 12 a year of it was those characters having to have a chaperone when they were together because of it, but it built a better story. It informed both characters. And that's what you're after, right? Is you want moments, you want to be in those moments, you want to craft those moments that inform the story and inform the characters, allow the story to build, allow the characters to build. Um, I read this interesting thing recently where somebody was complaining on one of the Facebook groups. Imagine that about like my players have been told they need backstories, and that's just rubbish. No one cares what you were before you got to this. The story is crafted from that point forward, and I get what he's saying, right? I do, but if you don't know that your character was beaten by the city guards, then when you have that interaction with the city guards later, you don't get that cool moment. I mean, I don't necessarily need to know what you did on your 11th birthday and your 12th birthday and your 13th birthday, but those moments, right? It's and that's it, right? You can't. It's also harder to be in the moment if you have nothing to inform the moment. And I think you'll see that that happens sometimes with new players who are still timid, who then go on to be very excellent role players. Um, their first character is overdeveloped or underdeveloped, and then often, even if it's overdeveloped, is underexpressed. And so they have a harder time existing in those moments. And so I guess that's what they end up doing is existing in the moments instead of thriving in the moments. And that's what we all want, oh, to the best of my knowledge. And anyone feel free to argue with me. But when we sit down at a table collectively, just like you said, it's your job to make sure that you and everyone else at the table try to have the most fun you can have. It's also your job to help everyone thrive in those moments, yourself included.
Yeah, you have to realize when it's time to carpe diem, and step up to the plate, and then be willing to reciprocate. And yeah, I mean it can be difficult to do, and I think a lot of people struggle with it. It seems like a lot of people struggle with it.
I
So
wonder if a lot of people struggle with it because they feel they need permission.
yeah, I have been in moments when I have found me denying myself permission to go forward with something, where I get caught up in I don't know if that's too much, or I don't know if that's too far, or it doesn't feel quite right, or I don't know if I'm ready to sing, or whatever it might be. Sometimes putting yourself out there in the moment, if you're not engaged, fully immersed, it's tough.
That's one of the beauties of improv, though, right? Is having that moment come and having to recognize it. One of the most enjoyable things about our game that is I absolutely adore Sir John and Dane's interactions. But there have been times that Eli has caught me so hard in the feels that I have to very rapidly be able to rip my brain back out of Steve feeling for Sir John's character to Dane having to respond as someone who feels for John's character in an entirely different way, because Steve feels for him in a meta sense. Like Steve knows the overarching things, Dane does not. And it's interesting to try and pare down the what is reactionary emotion and what is character emotion. And I love the fact that I get faced with that. And not just from Eli, who plays Sir John, but from so much of that group that because they're constant like it's such a game of t-ball, right? Everyone is setting you up. Everyone is waiting for you to hit that next home run, and everyone's doing that, and it's so wonderful. But yeah, man, Eli has punched me in the feels a couple times.
Yeah, yeah. Their reaction or their interaction with one another is one of the cornerstones of that campaign. Absolutely, and there's a lot of them, a lot of cornerstones in that campaign.
Yes.
And that's one of the questions that I actually had for you. So, in that campaign that you were just speaking of, you play Dane, who is the squire to Sir John, this BC that you're talking about. So, Dane grew up listening to stories about brave knights and their deeds, and he wants to follow in their footsteps. And recently, you also became a player in the shorter term Star Wars campaign of mine, where you play Sixer, a droid who has these stories about gunslingers and swashbuckling adventure that he's heard about, and now he tries to emulate. Is this coincidence, or is this a bit more of a look behind the curtain into Steve's mind?
So it is. So I thought about that after I pitched you the idea on Sixer. I was like, huh. And I think it is. I enjoy the idea of playing someone who is aspiring to something. And in the in the banner game, the way that I, as Steve, see it is Tord and Sir John and Eddard and Ariana are the heroes that Dane wants to be, right? If you took all of them and mushed them together, they are those Arthurian legends. But Dane's not ever gonna is not likely in the near future to play out to be that big hero, right? It's a much cooler arc for him to chase after that and see how that develops him rather than all of a sudden becoming one of these shield toting, sword wielding heroes. And with Sixer, he gets to jump into that. He gets to immediately become that swashbuckling hero, but with no training guide, no tutelage that Dane's receiving. And so it's the difference between in a Shakespearean play playing the hero of the play, Dane, and playing the fool who affects to be the hero. And so on paper, they look to be the same character. And then when you see them play out, you realize that one of them is truly the meat and potatoes of what it means to be a hero, and the other one is what happens when your average Joe puts on the costume and gets to play him for Halloween. And I had wanted to explore both sides of it. Um, I also think that for any role playing game, having an aspiration of what you want, of what the character wants to be, should be maintained outside of what does the player want the character to end up being mechanically. And in doing so, if you choose the idea like I did of, oh man, here's this guy who wants to be a swashbuckling hero, and here's the guy who wants to be this fantastical knight, those are both tropes that are easily lashed onto. And in Day's case, it plays a lot slower and a lot more pure. And in Sixer's case, it plays out a lot more the fool, right? It's the facade of being a hero because I see Dane as a hero, um, not of the caliber of Tord and Sir John Ariana Shell. Like he's not that, but he is a hero in a fantasy tale. Sixer is a bumbling idiot who would be better off in a SNL, Star Wars. And so I do think that part of it is a behind the curtain look at Steve, who, when I am starting to develop a character, I tend to latch onto an affectation or a trope as the starting point for the character, so that they don't. Because so many times when you play so many games, you end up going, "Is this the same character I played in the other game, just with a different name?" And I realize I tend to be very guilty of that. So I was like, all right, well, if I purposely choose the same starting point and then purposely take them two different directions, am I moving away from that and now flexing a muscle so that the next time I go to make a character, I am more informed about my own self as a player and therefore put on a better performance and a better character by having worked on that muscle?
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And to be fair, I was not trying to paint you into a corner of, this is the kind of character you play, or that there are any more similarities between Dane and Sixer than just what I mentioned. I just thought it was an interesting observation that I wanted to ask about.
It is, and like it's one of those ones. As soon as you asked me, I literally paused for a second and ran through every character that I've played with you, and went, "How many other ones did this?" And I went, "All right, all right, I'm okay. Like none of them really totally stepped on the toes of it. Like, but it does bring up an interesting thing is, and I guess this is a question back at you, if you don't mind. Uh, so do you find yourself having some same key points that is your core character that you tend to play? Do they tend to have a little bit of an overlap that is a comfort for you, a safe zone, and then you can build out of it? Carol, I can remember most of them. I only recently have I been blessed to play more and more of Jeremy. Prior to that, it was kind of spotty. So yes, I played an old wizard. It was like 95 years old when he did a redo of what module was that? It was one of the Abtab modules.
Oath of the Frozen King.
Oath of the Frozen King. And then we did your Wonderland spinoff,
Yep.
and then the one shot with the Chrome City.
Yeah, the Drift Chapel one.
Which, by the way, is one of my favorite game sessions I've ever played in.
Dude, thank you.
And it had everything to do with the way you ran it, and then Megan being one of the most incredible role players I've ever played with.
Yeah, she is definitely somebody who understands how to just go with it and just live in the moment of what's going on. Very much so. But yes, to answer your question, I definitely have certain elements that most of my characters have in common. Usually they are playfully antagonistic. I will find someone else in the group to kind of dig on that I think can take it and give it back. There's just something I like about that relationship in an adventuring party, and it's something that I'm able to improv well. So it's certainly something that I fall back on a lot. I also tend towards playing characters that I feel are heroic, even if they're anti-heroic.
Okay. Do you talk about being in the moment and sort of developing that? Do you find it easier to build those moments and trigger those moments because there are certain core elements? So you as a player, knowing those core elements, can more easily field that ball when it comes your direction because it tends to have a set feel to it.
I think so. I think I try pretty hard, even if it's subconsciously, to establish that kind of a relationship fairly early on, even in a one shot, so that if a moment in a scene comes up where I'm either uncertain of what to do or that feels like the right call, the groundwork has already been laid and it's not a surprise to someone, hopefully, whenever it goes that direction.
Yeah, that makes that makes a lot of sense. And I would love to at some point ask other prolific role players if they do the same thing. If there's a couple of things they keep close to the chest that they allow to, and I hate the word trigger because it's gotten on to mean something else. But if there's something that you keep close to the chest to allow you to be informed, I was talking about that Chrome City, the Drift Chapel game that you ran, that the crazy moment where Megan's character comes outside and like the painting was of her, right? That was also my character's ex. That was like the way that just rooted and took off. Like that would be a very interesting conversation to have with her to go, was there something in that moment for you that had previously existed so that you could field it? Because it fielded so flawlessly. She did so much heavy lifting in that scene so quickly, and then and it's that thing of she lifted it and then flawlessly handed it back to my character, and so we got to share it. And uh I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can, in a one shot or even in a campaign, create that moment and live in it that rapidly without having a couple of things that you have consciously or subconsciously decided that is meaningful, that will have weight and be able to affect me. And I wonder if that, as the hobby evolves, if that's not something that GMs and players should address, is when you're talking about the characters, because you do a very good job of saying, hey, here's a questionnaire for your character, fill it out. And then anybody who's ever played Jeremy, you get a second questionnaire that is now more in depth that you need to fill out again, but it's worth it. But I wonder, like, is there value in having that conversation and establishing that? Because if the GM knows those those things you're holding close, that your cue cards you're looking at and going, all right, if any of these come up, that's my moment, then the GM can pitch it to you, right? And if the people at the table know those, they can pitch it to you. And I think that that's kind of what D&D tried with the bonds and traits and stuff like that was. But I wonder if you can't sharpen that to narrow it down to make that a better tool at the table. It's almost like asking what's personal to your character, right?
Yeah, and I think that that's something that naturally grows in a group that has played together for a long period of time. You start to understand the psychology of not only the characters that are represented at the table, but also the players at the table. As a GM, the people that I've been playing with for 20 years now, I very much know what, to use the term, triggers. I know how to get this person to do what I would like them to do, to how to set this adventure hook. I know what it's going to take to get them on board. I know what it's going to take to get this person on board. I know what it's going to take to get her on board. They might be different things, and I might be able to find something that'll set the hook for 3 different people at once, but I'm going to have to find something else that's going to get the rest of the people on board, or make it important enough for those other characters that I know I can hook with this particular lead in to convince the rest of the group to do so.
Do you find yourself, at this point in my relationship with you, I would consider you a prolific dungeon master. You
Thank
are
you.
always contributing, always out there, always have ideas, and never once have I ever been disappointed by them. Um, do you find yourself when you're running, when you're writing, when you're preparing, do you have in your mind a moment for the character that you want to be that moment where you, as the DM controlling the universe, are going to help lift up that moment for that character to experience and shine? Do you find yourself ever writing for those moments?
I am always looking for that kind of stuff. Um, if somebody tells me that their daughter is estranged and they haven't seen them in some period of time, and someone else has chosen as their connection that they're the sister-in-law, talking about my momentum game, these 2 different PCs have an NPC that's shared, and one of them is the aunt to this PC and the other is the father, and the father has this estranged relation. Like, why would I let that go? Like, that is gold to be mined as a dungeon master, in my opinion. So, of course, they came across this NPC and she's in distress and needs help. And, she's angry and bitter towards the father, but also is lost and confused because this place is scary and awful. So it's a way to make sure that people sit up and pay attention. Because you can, if you want to hook a player, there is no better way to do so than to take a part that they gave you coming into the game and making it front and center and manipulating it, especially threatening it.
All right. Again, reversing the roles, I'm going to ask you another question. So,
Sure.
spoilers for anyone who has not caught up to the last episode of the Banner campaign. But the moment when Sir John basically was going to die, and you, as the storyteller, did a quick mathematical equation in your head, and you said, "Do I change this? Because will it better the story? Will it better the character? Will it prolong the play? Is it adding craftsmanship to the tale?" And you opted to essentially Deus Ex Machina the scene. In that moment, or in that execution, it created a moment. how prepared were you for that moment as Sir John's father? Because I mean, I guess you sort of saw it coming as the hit points were rapidly declining and the damage was not. But that's interesting, right? Because what we've talked about so far is being in the moment as a player. Well, what about when the tables flipped? What about having to be in that moment all of a sudden as the storyteller who is in control of a myriad of characters? But here was a moment that an NPC was truly what was lifted up to share that spotlight with his son, Sir John. Like, how prepared were you for that? How did that culminate in your mind?
So, like specifically to that scene, I knew that it was going to be very, very difficult for him to succeed in a one-on-one fight against this NPC. He was a very high CR. He's very well known in the kingdom. Like he is meant to be this monumental figure, even if it's not somebody that he likes. And I was fairly certain that he was going to get his ass handed to him. And I was not surprised when that happened. But generally speaking, in moments like that, I have a very cinematic imagination. I picture things in my head as if it were a movie that I was watching. So when something like that is, when it comes up and it surprises me, a lot of the time I'm able to kind of mentally take stock of the pieces on the table and say, okay, who's there? How are they feeling about what's happening? Does anybody want to say or do anything based on how things are unfolding? And in that moment, with all of the strife that had been developing between Sir John and his father, and he just saved his father's life, there's this, like you said, a turning point in their relationship. Things have changed forever now that he has saved him. And it just felt in a, again, recognizing the scene that you're in, the kind of story or the moment of the story that you're in based on tropes and other media that you've consumed, being able to recognize and say, this is that moment. This is the moment when the estranged father now comes to his rescue. Because it would have been easy to kill his character off. And many DMs would have done so. I don't pull punches, and there are moments when a character death is a good thing. It could be a fantastic moment. But if it's not right, then it just feels awful. It leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth, and it makes the story like collapse. Not entirely to pieces, but just it takes it from the arc that it's on, and it drops too far if it's not the right moment. And I think doing it outside of the right moment can be doing a disservice to the game.
I would agree, and it's character death is always that ultimate moment to live in, right? And it really, and it sounds weird, but character death is the ultimate moment to live in, as long as it has impact and meaning. Uh, and I don't care what the dice say. No character should die without meaning. It's silly. To me, it falls onto the same thing as the DM goes. There's a ladder. It's well made, leaning at a 45-degree angle, secured at the top of the wall. Go ahead and give me that climb check. Why? What's the risk? What's the that's dumb, right? And so like don't get me wrong. If you're a bunch of first level characters and you run up and you punch the ogre barbarian in the face, you're probably gonna die because I mean that was stupid. And the meaning in that is let's learn from the stupid. But if you have a campaign that's been going on for a while, you want the character death to be meaningful. And I've had the enjoyment of playing campaigns that have lasted long enough where players have gone on their way in the military, and so their characters had to be written out and stuff like that. Alex Gillette ran a game for us that lasted 49 sessions playing weekly. I think we missed 3 weeks in an entire year. All on YouTube, by the way. If you're looking for someone else who I would say is as good as Jeremy, Alex Gillette is an amazing storyteller. Go check out his stuff too. But at one of the last sessions, there comes a moment where we're fighting the big bad guy, who at this point had been player had to leave, and so that player's character ended up becoming the big bad guy, who's the brother of one of the other characters, and whew, man, intense. But he's going to release this orb essentially that's going to eat the world, and I had that ultimate gifted moment where I had this relic that would create this sort of regeneration effect. And so here's this death orb and here's this life orb. And so like everyone's over on this side fighting, and I look over and Rob Davis's dwarf looks over and he sees me, and there's this moment where I just go, bye. There's no words exchanged, and he turns on the life orb and he jumps in and he grabs the death orb, and the two cancel each other out, saving the world. How better can you go out? But it it's one of those things that you go, that's the ultimate moment, and the players and the DM so elegantly gave it to me to have, and it was upsetting. It was upsetting to lose the character that I played for a year. It was upsetting to the players to lose this character who had been a part of the group for a year. And there's this moment at the end where everyone's going, there had to be a different way. There had to be a different way. And maybe there was, but was there a better moment? Right. And sometimes that's the better option, is have the best moment you can. And, dice be damned.
I could not agree more with that sentiment. Again, if you're living in the moment, you understand when it's time, when it feels right for a character to make an exit. And embracing that sometimes is, again, it's not about where your character ends up in the heap of everything. It's how you fit into the story. And sometimes a character death, especially a main character death, Boromir in the Lord of the Rings, that's one of the most emotional moments especially in the movies. Like, without that, the ending of that chapter, the ending of that part of the story arc falls flat. So sometimes it's not that it's necessary, but sometimes the moment is right for that to happen. And especially in a game like Dungeons and Dragons, I hear people talk about this kind of stuff all the time. And you don't have to have a character's death be permanent. In a game like Dungeons and Dragons, there's magic that brings people back from the dead, and it doesn't have to cheapen the death. There was a campaign that I ran. My wife's character ended up dying, and she was livid with me. She didn't speak to me hardly at all for 2 days afterwards. But her character was an assassin. She then was resurrected. The group gathered their resources and asked for favors from NPCs, and they managed to find a temple that would resurrect her. But it was to the god of death. The god of death came to her before she was able to come back and said, I'll let you go back, but you owe me 100 mortal lives before you get to actually experience true peace. So she agreed, and so she came back and lived the rest of the time with these marks from this death god on her body. And she was a geisha, so it was kind of like she was deformed, by their culture's standards. So it was this very damning arrangement, but it led to some really amazing character development, all because of this one moment where we just allowed her character to die when it felt right in the moment.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the idea that we've said that your character can have a moment, and your character should help build moments for other characters, and as a player, you should help build those moments for other characters. Those moments, when you're living in them, when you're looking for that immersion, they don't have to be positive moments. They don't, and in fact, I would challenge everybody when you're making a character, no matter what system you're playing in, if there's not a section on your character sheet that says disadvantage, write one in. Write something that is limiting for your character. And when you're trying to create that moment, look down on that piece of paper at the limiting factor and go, how would that play in right here? Because you'll get more mileage out of your limitations than you will the cool things you're able to do. Because you know what every other character in every other role-playing system can do? Those same cool things. They won't have the same limitations that your character does. And embracing those is part of how you find those moments. It is something that Eli does so wonderfully in the game, and it's one of my favorite things with he and Tord, is Sir John and Tord. They both have this pride, this ego, and it is expressed in such different ways, and it affects them both so differently that they can have a scene that is built entirely on the pride of those two characters, and it is impactful and meaningful because they're both playing to the limitations of their pride, and their pride limits them in different ways, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, I agree. Especially with what you said, you can get a ton of mileage out of your flaws, um, much more mileage than you can out of a character's strengths, um, because at the end of the day, most role playing games, like you said, you're not playing a schlub. You're playing something or someone who is extraordinary, and the things that are strengths for a character are typically what makes them extraordinary. But those things are also the things that make them unidentifiable. They're unrelatable at that
Yep.
point. But if you introduce flaws, especially very human flaws, very difficult things to overcome, then all of a sudden you have pulled back the core concept of this character into a more humanly relatable circumstance. And people in the audience and people at the table and you yourself are going to feel that that is a much better realized character because you're able to identify with at least something about them.
And I think that's super important. Using the word identify, talking about living in the moment. If you can't identify the moments, if you can't identify the character in that moment, you can't live in it. And so having something that's relatable, it's funny. Carol over in the YouTube chat was saying that one of the things that she gets admonished for is relating too closely to her characters. And she says, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's both. It's both normally, right? It's great that you relate, but then you do run that risk of experiencing real emotion with the character, and so that can be a double-edged sword. Um, it also it also means if you're relating with them 100% of the time, then if the other players are not, then some of the things that they say and do will feel flat to you, and that's not anyone's fault. But if you feel that, if you experience it, I would definitely recommend having that after game conversation about it, right? Because if Jeremy and I are in a game together, which has not happened, but if we're in a game together, and I'm constantly pitching flat to Jeremy because of how he's relating to it, then unbeknownst to me, I am detracting from his fun. And as his fun declines, I will notice that. And now my fun declines. Whereas a quick conversation about those moments and how to craft them fixes that. Because again, um, just like if you tune in and watch Jake when he's doing his building, like his terrain crafting and stuff like that, what we do is that this is simultaneously art and craftsmanship, and it is a solo artist working on a team of craftsmen to create a multimedia project. And without the discussion betwixt all the craftsmen to say this is the common language we're using, this is the boundaries we're establishing, this is the behind the scenes of what my character is thinking, then it's harder to create those moments. Because unlike in a book where I can read it and I can go, I know what Jeremy's character is thinking because I can read it, unless he's going to stop and just just decide to have a soliloquy, which soliloquy is also awesome. Feel free to have those. Um, Without that, the only way to craft it is to stop and talk about it as the group. And so, I guess in a grand scheme of things, referring back to what we started on, being in the moment is a table cooperative thing because Jeremy can be in the moment and I could be over there yakking on my cell phone and I'm gonna rip him out of his moment. Jeremy can be in the moment and I've been paying attention but haven't been able to get into the groove and he pitches me something and it falls flat and now neither one of us are. Or as a storyteller, he's really in the moment and as the group of players, we're distracted by some NPC shoe peddler and we're not living in the crafted moment. And sure, it's QC. We've all seen the memes, right? The paper NPC that has nothing, the fleshed out NPC, and all of a sudden, all the characters over here talking to the paper shoe peddler. It happens, and that's the job of the DM to shift that moment at that point. But it's also the job of the players to recognize that the GM's put in the hard work and crafted and they need to try and live in the moment that he is crafting. And if at the end of it they go that NPC with the shoes is much more interesting, then now it's the job of the GM to go, okay, why, and how do I either make my other NPCs as interesting, or how do I bring in Paper the Shoe Cobbler, like, and that's okay to do because it's a team game.
Absolutely. One of the things you mentioned earlier was like a team of writers, like on a television series. And this is a drum that I will beat until my dying breath. Communication is the key to any relationship. And that's no different than a room full of writers that work on a successful television series or a table full of role players that works successfully. If you have good communication, then things are going to go great. If you have poor communication, eventually there's going to be a breakdown. And it's just a matter of how bad it is, whether the group can continue past it.
And if you're new, getting into the hobby, or if you're playing with new players, if you have that moment beforehand, 5-6 minutes to say, hey, how do you communicate? How do you give and receive? If you have that moment with that new group, that whether it's getting into the hobby or those new players, take that moment, find out what the common language of the group is, so that and that goes for so much. You know, there may be a player who says, hey, this is off limits for me because it's too personal. And part of your responsibility as a player is to be brave enough to at least inform the DM that, hey, this is a can we avoid? And as a group coalesces and congeals to develop that language so that those things don't get touched on, but also so that we understand the same language we're using, because that's going to help you craft those moments. It's going to make it easier. Just like sharing character goals, right? Like, we're a team of writers. So if I don't know that Jeremy's gnome bard wants to be the next, big playwright, I can't sell for him. It's like the what old wrestling term from like WWF, selling. Yeah. So like if your player, the other player has always been talked about how brawny and strong his barbarian is, when he picks up that wagon cart, sell for him, make it a big deal, give him that moment. And please don't then go pick up the wagon because you can. I mean, if it's gonna be that character driving character, the Tord and Sir John, that makes sense. But don't steal someone's thunder, right? Like, it's one of the things. It's interesting. Do you find it harder to have those crafted moments if you're playing a fighter and someone else is playing a fighter, or if you're playing a cleric of Lathander and someone else is like, oh, I'm playing a cleric of Torm, like, or of that was a bad example because they're not parallel enough, but you get my point. Like, where they parallel, and so some of your special sauce is on each other's buns. That's awkward, but there's a better way of phrasing that, and someone throw it in the comments for me because your special sauce being on someone's buns. This is an adult conversation.
It's not that kind of podcast, Steve.
This is an adult conversation. There will be adult suggested themes used, and if you don't like that, you can go listen to another thing. Um, but do you find as a player, do you find that harder to have those moments?
There are times that has come up, and yes, but typically that's when I find myself looking outside of the mechanical design of the character and more at their personality and their flaws, kind of what they're bringing to the table in a different way than that other character, and finding the differences and then putting a magnifying glass on them, bringing them into better relief, and hitting that note more often, to make certain that we feel different. So there's a couple other things that I wanted to touch on before we wrap things up. And we kind of danced around this particular topic, this particular talking point a few times. But one of the most important things, I think, as far as living in the moment, is the ability to separate meta emotion from in character emotion. So some players seem to be apprehensive about pushing emotional barriers within a scene, whether it's extreme sadness or fear, anger, love, a lot of the ones that we talked about earlier. And I think that the reason might be because it's difficult to release these emotions once a scene is then finished, to unpack them. So you discussed having the kind of debriefing, if you will, at the end of a session. Are there other ways that you can separate those two things, that you can walk away from an in character emotion that's really intense? So like, how do you invest strong feelings into a moment and then turn it off once you're done?
So I think there's a couple of different tools that you can use. Um, One is being psychotic. That will work out very well for you.
It helps.
Uh, so in real life, right? Sitting at a table full of buddies and you're playing, you do exactly what you just said. You stand up and walk away from it. You give yourself that physical break. Um, and let that be your moment to come back down. Because if there's not that natural break where you can stand up and walk away, then that emotion's meant to carry, right? Because that scene's still going on. And so now we're dealing with the repercussions, the fallout, the continuation of it. And you want to still be in that moment. If you've gotten to that point where you are crying over the death of a loved one of the characters, and you are addressing this king who's responsible for it, you want that emotion to continue. That's still your scene. That's still your moment. Your moment doesn't have to be 2 minutes long. If your moment ends up being 42 minutes long, have your moment, right? Um, 43 minutes, we got to talk, but 42, and really what I meant by that is don't cut it off until it becomes problematic. If it becomes problematic for the scene, your DM will steer you, right? They'll refocus the cam. I love that term. They'll refocus the camera. I also like to think of it in sort of a cinematographic way of, the camera sees this and maybe the characters don't. Um, so the camera will turn. But if it's meant to write it out, you got to write it out, because that everything you just invested into that when the other player character walks up to you and says something, then that emotional bridge, they're offering you the other side of that bridge, right? And sometimes accepting the other side of that bridge is your way out of that emotion. Just like in real life, turning to a friend who can comfort you, a friend, a parent, whatever the case is, um, having that ability to cross that bridge is important. And sometimes that does mean literally standing up and walking away. And if the moment allows for that, take that. Take your moment. You've earned it. Bravo, right? That's the exit stage left. And a lot of times, go back and look at your classical plays. the character earned that exit, right? The actor earned that exit because they had to go back and shed of that emotion. If it's online, I turn my camera off for a moment. I'll still be vocally there, but I've had times where Eli's punched me in the feels, uh, or other players have punched me in the feels. Karen's done it to me a couple times too, where I've you have that moment, and yeah, Dane's upset about it. He's crying. Steve's crying, and then you have to turn off the camera. You have to go, okay, cool. Checking in with myself. Self, are you okay with what just happened? Great. It's make believe. Awesome. Camera back on. Let's go. And so that becomes super important, is the separating player emotion from character emotion. And I think that that's part of the social contract that needs to exist at the table. Being aware of the real life moment as well as the end game moment. And if that character is experiencing it, enjoy it, soak it up, love it. If that player is experiencing it, it's a game, guys. We can put that on pause and let's take care of our family, right? Let's take care of this person that just had an emotion, good, bad, or indifferent. Because if it's something they don't want to experience again, now our dynamic has to shift so we don't do that. And if it's something that they do want to experience again, there's people that approach this hobby as a method for expression and working things out. And I'm not going to deny them that. That would be shameful on anyone's part to deny them that. But that needs to be part of the social contract at the table, right? None of us are. I am not personally a qualified mental health counselor. I'm sure there are people who play that are. My father actually being one of them. But having that moment that you need that self check-in, that moment, and whether you do it off camera, off table, or off to the side, if you're sitting there teary-eyed, if we're playing in real life and I'm sitting there teary-eyed and I look at you and I just go like this and gesture towards another character, I would expect someone of your style to pick up and go, okay, I'm going to shift the focus over to here for a moment. And that's comes with time, that comes with knowing the players. But yeah, I think the big thing to get out of that moment is to do a quick self check-in and make sure that self is okay with what just happened. The character doesn't have to be okay with what just happened, but yourself does.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction. Understanding that something was in character and being able to shut the door on it and leave it there. To put a bookend, or like you said, to complete the bridge, to have it meet the other side of the bank, and then be done. Have it be finished. I think that that's an important thing to learn how to do, especially if it's something that you struggle with on a personal level, and you know that about yourself. I think it's a really important thing to make other people at the table aware of. If you need to have that moment, absolutely speak up. And if somebody denies you that, then absolutely shame on them, and you should probably just stop playing with them.
At least have the conversation first,
Yes,
because they may not recognize it.
That's fair. That's very fair. Okay. So I have one more talking point, and then we have a question that we were given. So the talking point, and this is, again, something that we kind of have mentioned on and off throughout the discussion, but something that I see a lot of, even from people that I would consider to be great role players, is not understanding when a moment doesn't belong to your character. This is one of the things that I love about games like Fiasco in particular, because it's established that each individual scene belongs to a specific character. It even uses that kind of language. So the ability to know when to share the spotlight, the term that's kind of thrown around, it is a very important thing. But I think that it's more important to know when you need to be the supporting character to another PC's moment. Like we talked about, when you're the one who's building the mountain and lifting another PC up so that they can reach that pinnacle moment. This is something that I have seen you do a lot, as Dane, especially. And are there any tips or tricks as a player that you use, a tool in your belt, that you use to recognize these moments and then doing what you can to enrich them?
Man, that's tough because I struggle with it. I struggle with identifying when it's time for me to shut my mouth. Um, on and asking anyone in my life, I struggle with this. And it part of that is born out of personality type, right? Part of it is throughout my role playing career. Can we call it that? Whatever. My tenureship as a role player. Um, Often the groups I play with were new or not as confident in speaking as I have become through professors beating it into my head, I suppose. My dad rubbing off on me because my dad will also talk and talk and talk. Often very interesting stuff, but also sometimes just dad stuff. You're just like, come on, man. Like, no more jokes, dude. Um, so it's hard, but because you develop this thing where everyone sort of they go, a decision needs to be made, and every single head turns towards you, and you go, but I didn't want to be the talkie-talkie. I'm literally playing a mind barbarian. Like, come on, guys. Um, and so I've tried to step back and be more into those roles where you're not the talkie. Like the one thing, and not for bad, but the one thing that really crushed me in the Star Wars thing when they were like, "Can you guys imagine the face of our groups are a droid?" And I was like, "No, not supposed to happen. There's so many other better choices. So many other better choices. Pick someone else." Um, but man, you know what? What I look for, I think, is that look in someone's eye, the expression, their face, or from the writer's point, and you go, "How do I make Karen have an excellent time in this next couple of seconds?" You know, what what detail can I throw out that maybe uh Tord latches onto and can paint something out of it. And it is so hard in the banner game, I'm not gonna lie, because you do such a good job of these NPCs that we've all come to love and hate, that everyone wanted to murder the the Boar Knight. Like all of us did, right? None of us wanted him to be the Baron here. None of and so like everyone wanted to dress him down. Everyone wanted to yell at him. Everyone wanted to put him in his place, but it wasn't our job. It wasn't our moment. It wasn't. Could we have done it? Yes. Could Ariana Shell have stepped up and dressed him down? Sure. Would it has been as impactful as Sir John doing it? Absolutely not. And so I think that what you can do, that tool in your belt, is you go, I've got 50 cents to spend. Do I buy my 50-cent scene, or do I give my 50 cents to Eli and he gets to have $1 scene? And which one's better? And sometimes a better scene is his 50 cents and your 50 cents, and that magnifies, but a lot of times investing in that other player gives them that that ability. And so think about it sometimes that way, like where do I want to invest my 50 cents, my dollar, whatever the case is. And you'll have moments where you put in your 50 cents and then Eddard puts in his 50 cents and Tord puts in his 50 cents, and now we have a $2 scene. and $1.50, whatever the crap it comes out to. Math is not my strong point right at this moment. I don't deal in change. Um, but nonetheless, you get a more powerful scene out of it. And so if you really do think of your screen time as an investment and being able to pass it to somebody else, and if you're playing online, here's a really great tool. Um, Especially when Hangouts was a thing, right? It is a really cool thing where when you talked, the camera shifted, right? The camera does not always have to be on you. Let it go to someone else and then find value in what they said. Find value for your character in what they said and remember it. Write it down because you know what that's going to let you do? It's going to let you ask for their 50 cents later on. And you're going to be able to have your dollar scene. And I'd rather go see a performance of dollar scenes than 50-cent scenes. And that's how it's a give and take, right? Like, and that's the rapport you build at the table. That's something that's everyone in that game is so good at is the give and take of it. Um, and does it mean there might be a session where you're mostly quiet? Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. But look at look at Game of Thrones, chapters written from one character's perspective, characters that go away for a season and then come back. And that's okay. You don't love them any less. All right. Maybe Martin's characters you love a little bit less from time to time, but uh it gives them that moment. It is that selling. And that's another thing that you can do is learning when it's not your scene. Have your moment inside the scene by building the other character up. Right? If you're just itching to say something, you don't need to steal the spotlight. Say it in a manner that keeps the spotlight over there, but gives you that little bit of a something. Um, and it's hard, man. It's real hard, and it it is more difficult when you're more invested in your character than you are invested in the other characters. And again, if you look at it with your quarters, if you had the opportunity to invest in one successful business, your character, or five successful businesses, the other characters, which one's the better decision? Invest in the five things that are going to be successful. They in turn will give you your moments. And I think that's like find a way to give someone else a moment once in a while. I think that's empowering. Make sure your DM's okay with it, but find a way to give them that moment. And once you start learning to look for moments you can give to other people, it's easier to recognize the moments that you don't have to be the center of attention. I'm really glad though that you said that I have successfully done that with Dane. I appreciate that because man, do I struggle with that. Uh, it's hard playing a kid who is not as knowledgeable about things and perhaps not as I won't say well spoken, but verbacious as I am. To not, it's never Dane's place to talk to the NPCs unless given permission, but it's always Dane's place to talk to the PCs. And that's been a really cool thing. Like, you know, did Steve want to flip out on that night? Yes, he did. And I'm sure Dane did too, but you can't. You can't. So practice, give, look for moments to build up the other characters, and don't be afraid of not being the spotlight. That's the big thing. It's not your story, it's our story.
Yeah, the analogy with the investment with the change, I think is a very very eloquent way of putting that. We throw the term investment around a lot as far as buy-in, usually like a suspension of disbelief, but this form of investment is is every bit as valid and important because the more invested you are in other characters and their stories, the more you're going to be paying attention for the moments when, oh, this is the guy that so and so has been looking for the whole campaign. Holy crap! This is the moment that they get to confront them. So this is the moment that I shut the fuck up, or that if I add anything, it's only trying to help point that towards the inevitable conflict that it's building towards.
It's crazy because you'll get those moments where it's your character's NPC, right? You're going this has been your quest. You finally found him. And as a player, if you ask yourself, what is more awesome in the moment, is to butt into the scene or be invited into the scene. And if that player who has established, like, this is my arch nemesis, this is my end game goal, this is my everything, then steps back and says, "You're with me," that's that relationship that stories look for, that movies look for. Those are the moments that it stops being Butch Cassidy and starts being Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, right? Like, that's those moments, and you get that from that investment, because when you invest into that other player and their character, you have to do both. You have to invest into the player with trust. You have to invest into the character with those moments that build up that raising of the scene. That's when it pays back the dividends that you've been investing in for so long. And whether that's the moment of sharing a spotlight, or it's the awesome culmination of the campaign and scene, you're going to get benefit from it because you're going to enjoy it either way.
Yeah, because if you look at, say, the moment in the Lord of the Rings, if you look at it from how it could have gone in a role playing game, when Frodo can no longer go forward, the way of the ring is too much. Sam's player, could have just easily stepped forward and said, "That's fine. I'll take the necklace and put it on now. I'll take it for now." But it's a better moment when Sam's player realizes that that's not his task, that that's not his moment, that that's Frodo's player's moment. But he can contribute by picking Frodo up and carrying him to finish this task.
And arguably, Sam is the stronger character in Lord of the Rings than Frodo is, because of what he has to endure, what he has to carry, and the fact that he is horribly responsible for everything that happens, but is promised no benefit of it. He's a character tasked by love, whereas Frodo is a character tasked by responsibility. And if you can choose that in your moments, in your character creation, in your world creation, in your campaign creation, to task people by love, whether it's love of self, love of an NPC, love of an ideal, and by that I mean if they're a cleric or whatever the case is, you'll find more mileage, better moments, higher moments than you will tasked by responsibility, because it is one of those, as we discussed earlier, primal emotions, and they're getting to act it out through their actions and not just through their words. That player is getting to experience the love of another character in a way that you would not be able to experience it any other way in a role-playing game. And so, like I said, I think I would argue that Frodo is the stronger character for what he does through all of it. Or sorry, that Samwise is, not Frodo. And if that's only done through crafting those moments, that's only done through not picking up the ring, but picking up the character, right? And so the character who has been tasked with responsibility still gets to experience his burden, so you're not cheapening it, but you have deepened the experience of you're being tasked by love. And that's what you look for, right? How do you deepen the character without detracting from another character. At any point you're deepening by detracting, something's wrong, right? Like that shifting doesn't really work in role play. It works sometimes in writing. I don't think it works in role play because you're not the single author of it. You can't shift that weight as easily. I could be wrong in that. I could be wrong in
No,
everything I've said tonight.
no, I think you're right. I think you're certainly onto something, and I think it's the more interesting thing typically is in how you can do both, how you can elevate someone else's motivation or goal while also uplifting your own. When you find the moments that you're able to kind of do both at once, that's typically where the role playing gold comes from, in my experience. It's those bridging of two ideas, not playing them at odds with one another, but finding a way to have both of them happen. That's typically where the best stuff comes from.
I 100% agree with you, and I think it's the idea of adding to the foundation rather than tacking on. You know, you can make a really gaudy building by constantly adding to it, or you can make a really strong building by shoring up the foundation. And I think that's the better way to go, and I think that's the way that you find the foundation for your moments is by shoring up those relationships with the characters and the relationships with the players.
Absolutely. Well, we have one question that came from Karen Davies. She asks, what do you do to prep before a game to help immerse yourself in your character?
I'm a horrible person. I do absolutely nothing. And the reason I don't is I let the moment that is crafted by the DM at the very beginning and those first few beats of the other characters immerse me. They're what ground me back to the character. And every single time. And I have found that that's not the perfect trick. Sometimes you sort of start off on your left foot instead of your right foot, and it takes you a minute to find it. But if I have my notes about Dane and I go through them and I go, oh, yeah. What I find is I'm in a much more self centered mind going into it than if I sit down and enjoy the characters, the setting, the story that other people are presenting in that moment and let that bring you back and inform you. Now, that being said, I do very purposely go, okay, work sucked. That needs to be out of my head. I've got XYZ going on. That needs to be out of my head. One of the most powerful experiences I've ever had was when I was going through all of my surgeries and stuff for cancer and all the other stuff. One, I got to experience the beauty of the community that is role playing and how they came to be around and support me and help me. But I also played several sessions from a hospital bed. Um, and trying to separate that reality from what you're going into in the game to get centered back into the character was harder. Uh, but it was more rewarding. It was beautiful to find that this hobby, that shared experience between yourself and the people at the table, transcends any limitations of space and health. Um, that you, as long as you have breath and voice, you can do this. You don't even need perfect mental clarity. Trust me. Go watch some of Alex's game when I'm on morphine. It's great. Um, but uh, but that was harder to separate that to then get back into the character. And the worry then is, do you start carrying real life into the character? And is your character now weighed down by life, right? We have all experienced life. When you stop experiencing it means you're dead, in case you're wondering. So we all experience life. And that's the cool thing. Life is dealing with that experience, right? That's how you know you're alive, is that experience, the good, the bad, the ugly. And arguably, it's why I will tell someone, I don't know where you're coming from, what's happened to you, but you're alive and I'm alive, and what we've experienced is life, and you're not any more alive than I am. So at least we have that level playing field, right? We all come from something. Uh, don't deny that informing your characters. Don't embrace that bit of trauma you've experienced, or don't be afraid to embrace that bit of trauma you've experienced in the past and let that inform a character. But that's an active choice. Don't let it slip in, because it robs you of your fun. It robs you of your fun. And at the end of the day, as Jeremy said, we're all here at a table, virtual or not, to have fun. So, if I had to suggest, clear your head for a few moments, whatever time it is you need. In the retail world, we call it checking your shit at the door, right? If you're having a bad day when you come in to be a cashier, check your shit at the front door. You can have a bad day before and a bad day after, but here you have to smile and do what you have to. And it's the same with role playing. And have that 10 minutes before the game to talk to those players who care about you as a player at the table about your bad day, because they've had them too. They're going to have some advice, or at the very least, some commiseration. Someone's going to crack a penis joke. You're going to laugh. And then you're in a better place when the game starts. And at the end of it, what you owe to the people at the table is the thank you for getting me out of my head, the thank you for sharing what you shared with me, and the thank you for making it a better game. And if you can do that every single time, then no matter what emotion you're bringing in with you, will inform your character. It will never take over your character. So give yourself the moment to clear your head. Find what grounds you back to the character. If it's a piece of artwork, a piece of music, if it's the other players, as I choose to do, because that's just what works for me. And enjoy that. Sometimes if I know we're jumping back into it, and I know it's going to be like a Sir John and a Dane thing right off the bat, I'll just go back and watch a couple of minutes of not even necessarily the last episode, but moments from another episode. And that connects me back to it. So, you can use that trick if you're playing online and they're recorded. Referring back to your character notes, I think helps, for some people. But the biggest thing is find what works for you to separate the player from the character. And you owe that to yourself as much as other people at the table.
That's very well said. I agree wholeheartedly. This game for a lot of people is escapism, and it is so good at doing such that it's used in therapy. I mean, licensed professionals use role playing as a way to get people out of where they currently are in their mental process, put them in a different place, even if just temporarily. And that can be very, very therapeutic. There's some people that come to the game table and need that escape, even if just for 2 to 6 hours or however long the session might be. So if that is something that you're looking for, that you need, I think it's very important to be aware of that, and to make your friends and fellow players at the table and the person running the game for you aware of that fact, so that they can take it easy if they need to, if you would like for them to, in a certain regard, a certain topic, or to help you excise that particular topic if that's what you're looking for, if that's the catharsis that you need. If you're pissed off at your boss and you want to come and just bash ogres' faces in because that's going to help you deal with that frustration and anger, then okay, let's put some ogres on the table and let's bash their faces in. Let's do it. And I think that's one of the things that helps make gaming so much more personal, especially the groups that you really feel a connection with, are groups that allow that to happen, that foster that. And I think that's an important thing to encourage if and when you can. So.
I 100% agree. When I was acting, when we got into shows, one of the things that the group of us who ended up being in a lot of shows together found is there's this really cool trick where you get together and you hold hands, or if you're in that more connected way, what you do is you'd reach your hand over and you'd put it on someone's heart so you could literally feel their heartbeat for those first few moments, because that human contact centers you. And then feeling where everyone kind of is connects you. And by the way, I'm not saying go around and start feeling up the people you're playing with, but find that moment before the game to be centered with everybody. And we do that a lot through our joking and discussion and catching up, because we only get to play once a month. But being in the moment isn't always about being your character in the moment. It is always about your player being in the moment. And that keeps you connected to these people who keep showing up week after week and dealing with your bullshit and their bullshit and the DM's bullshit and loving every minute of it. I do not use the term lightly when I tend to say that the people that I play with tend to become like family. They do. You care about them. You care about their characters. And that's when you win. That's the story right there, right? But it was awesome getting a chance to talk with you like this, Jeremy. I really, really enjoyed it. So thank you for having me come on and chat with you.
Man, yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for agreeing to come on and talk about this particular topic. It's one that, I have a list kind of going in my head of who I want to have on the channel, and there's always a kind of a matching game that I have to play of having this person would be great, but what do we talk about? What do we fill the time with? And I try very hard to try to find something that I think that person either is known for or that I think excels at doing, so that there will be plenty of material to hash out. You were on that list, and when I sat down and tried to think of what can I talk about with Steve, it's definitely taking that carpe diem, living in the moment, and more importantly, not having it always have to be about your character, knowing when to be the main character in the scene and when to be a supporting character in the scene. And I said it before, and I'll say it again. It is something that I think that you do very well. You seem to be keenly aware of, especially in Beneath the Banner Shadow. And it's been a lot of fun kind of hashing it out and digging deep with you on it. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
On a side note, Jeremy and I have never played together, so someone fix this.
Please. I would love that. I have to have somebody to antagonize, and I know Steve can take it, so
it'll be a lot of fun.
I agree, man. I look forward to the day when it happens. Well, everybody, thank you very, very much for tuning in, whether you are watching live with us this evening or whether you are watching in the future. I sincerely appreciate it. Hit the like button if this is the kind of thing you like. Subscribe if you want to, and stick around because there's sure to be a lot more. And until next time, may your dice roll high and your snacks always be within reach.